Speak to Win. Chapter 7. Platform Mastery. Impressing large audiences. Dream lofty dreams, and as you dream, so shall you become. Your vision is the promise of what you shall one day be. James Allen. Once upon a time, a meeting planner phoned a professional speaker to inquire into booking him for an upcoming event. The planner's first question was, "How much do you charge?" The speaker replied, "It depends on the length of the talk that you want me to give and the amount of time that it takes for preparation." The meeting planner then asked, "How much would you charge for a 30-minute talk? And how long would it take to prepare?" The speaker replied, "For a 30-minute talk, it would require 6 to 8 hours to prepare, and the fee would be $5,000. The meeting planner was surprised. "How much would you charge for a half-day talk, and how long would it take to prepare?" he asked. The speaker replied, "For a half-day talk, it would take about 3 to 4 hours to prepare, and it would cost $4,000. What about a full-day talk? How much is that?" "That would only cost $3,000. "How long would you require to prepare?" asked the meeting planner. "Oh," said the speaker, "if it is a full-day talk, I can start now." The shorter the talk, the more difficult. My point in the preceding story is that the shorter the talk, the greater the preparation and precision you need to deliver the talk within the time constraints allotted. If you have all day to speak, you can fill the time with stories, examples, and various points that revolve around your subject. If you have only 20 minutes, you must deliberately focus and concentrate on only those key elements that are necessary to get your message across. My first audience contained 7 people, but over the years, I have spoken live to as many as 25,000 people at a time. On one occasion, I spoke to 85,000 people at one time, with 2,000 people in the audience and 83,000 others in 600 locations via satellite hookup. The lengths of my talks and seminars range from 20 minutes to 3 and 4 days. Every talk that I have given, even one time only or repeatedly, has required detailed preparation and practice in order to deliver it effectively and well. As your audience size grows, the requirements and demands of yourself as a speaker increase. Speaking to large audiences is very different from speaking to smaller groups. The 8 parts of a keynote talk. As I described in Chapter 1, there are 8 parts of a keynote talk of 20 to 60 minutes to a large group. You can use this model to plan and organize your remarks. Let me touch on these points once more. Number 1, the opening. This is where you grab the attention of the audience members. Get them to focus on you and make them look forward to your coming remarks. Number 2, the introduction. This is your transition into the first point of your talk. Number 3, the first point. This is where you begin to build your case. Number 4, the transition into the next point. This is where you indicate that you are making a transition from the first point to the second point. Number 5, the second key point. This follows naturally from your first point and builds on it. Number 6, another transition. This is where you shift into your third point. Number 7, The third key point. This follows naturally from your first and second points. Number 8. The summary. This is where you wrap up your talk with a strong call to action. The 7 essential elements of a speech. There's a proven recipe or formula that you can use to design and present a speech on any subject to any audience. Each talk can be graded on a scale of 1 to 10 on each of these 7 parts. Whenever the speaker has a low score in one of these areas, it undermines the effectiveness of the entire talk. Introduction and opening. It's essential that you make a good first impression when you stand up to speak. As it happens, making a good first impression begins well before your speech. Preparation is the key. Start by taking a pad of paper and writing out your speech, word for word. Use the down-dump method I described in Chapter 2. Write out the title of the talk at the top of the page, and then write out every single point that you could make or include in this talk. Very often, this down-dump of ideas fills up 2 or 3 pages. After you have completed the down-dump, review the various points and begin to put them in sequence, clustering them around your major points. Record your entire talk and have it typed out double-spaced for you to review. Edit and polish the talk several times until you are happy with the sound, structure, and flow of the language. Once your talk is written out and you're satisfied with it, record it and then play it back, listening for parts that are unclear or that could be improved by rewriting. There are some other things you need to do to ensure that your talk begins well and that you make a good first impression. Practice makes perfect. Many people feel that Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is perhaps the finest single piece of oratory in the English language. The story was that he wrote the address on the back of an envelope as he rode by train to the dedication of the cemetery at Gettysburg. It seems that Lincoln had given parts of the Gettysburg Address and other speeches for several months before he crystallized it into what became oratorical history. He had practiced with various sentences and phrases until he finally had a perfect speech. Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech in Washington, D.C. is a wonderful and inspiring piece of oratory. But Martin Luther King had practiced delivering parts of that speech over and over again in the previous years. The final speech brought together the very best elements of many previous speeches. Check out the facility. A second part of making a powerful first impression is for you to arrive early, preferably the day before, and then walk through and familiarize yourself with the entire group. Check the stage, the sound system, the lighting, and the seating of the audience. See Chapter 10 for more about what to look for. Never assume that someone else is going to care as much about the setup as you do. Remember, many of the people setting up meeting rooms for large and small audiences are minimum wage workers whose sole aim is to get the job done and get out. I know this firsthand because not long ago I was invited to give a 90-minute speech to 4,000 executives and staff of a fast-growing international company. It was a 3-day conference, and the company brought in a team of experts to set up the stage, side screens, sound, lighting, and seating. I arrived at lunchtime in the middle of the second day. I arrived early, and I'm glad I did. My style of speaking includes writing notes on an overhead projector or an Elmo. I stand in the center of the stage with the projector to my right so that I can speak and illustrate my points as we go along, maintaining eye contact with the audience. In this case, the crew had set up the Elmo to the side, at the back of the stage, and facing in the opposite direction from the audience. When I pointed out, as gently as possible, that this setup would force me to walk away and face away from the audience each time I made a point, they shrugged their shoulders. It just wasn't that important to them. I quickly had them reposition the Elmo so I was facing the audience when I spoke. The talk came off very well. Mix with your audience. Prior to your talk, mingle with the meeting planners, your hosts, and if possible, some of the people who will be in your audience. Introduce yourself, ask them their names, and try to learn a little bit about them. Audience participants always enjoy talking to the speaker and asking questions. Your goal is to get a sense for the audience participants. You want to know what they're thinking and feeling. Above all, you want them to feel that you and they are on the same level. Listen to the other speakers. If your speech follows one or more other speeches, it is important that you arrive early and listen to the earlier speakers. It's essential that you know what has been said to this audience before you stand up to speak. Sometimes, I'm booked to speak last thing in the morning, before lunch. My host will say, "You will be on at 11 a.m., so you don't have to be here until 10:30 a.m. In every case, however, I will be in the room when the first speaker, usually an executive of the company, begins the first remarks of the day. When it is my turn to speak, after my introduction, I will refer to what previous speakers have said, especially if a senior executive has made a point about the business. I will complement the observations and contributions of the previous speakers by saying something like, "When your president, Robert Wilson, spoke to you earlier, he made an extremely important point. This proves to the audience that you care enough to participate fully in the meeting, as they are doing." There's another reason why you want to hear the previous speakers. If you don't know what they've said, you could find yourself saying something the audience has already heard, or that contradicts a point that someone made prior to your talk. For example, I remember giving a talk to 2,000 people in Chicago. My talk was after lunch, but I made it a point to be in the room by 8:30 a.m., when the other speakers began. The first speaker gave a good talk on the theme of the convention and wrapped up with a funny story. There was a 20-minute coffee break before the second speaker was introduced. The second speaker had not bothered to sit in on the first talk. He arrived just before he was scheduled to go on stage. His talk was also tied into the theme of the meeting, and at the end, to the surprise of the audience, he wrapped up by telling the same story that the first speaker had used. This time, there was a little bit of laughter and a certain amount of discomfort. You could see from the speaker's face that he was perplexed that so few people had laughed. Then, the worst thing that you can imagine happened. The third speaker, who had also not attended the talks given by the first two speakers, got up, gave his talk, and ended with the same story. This time, the audience was completely silent. Nobody thought the speaker was funny at all. In fact, it was clear to the audience that the speaker had not heard the earlier talks. You could see from the looks on the faces of the audience members that they had concluded that the speaker felt that he was too important to arrive early. As a result, he bombed completely. Think on your feet. On several occasions, I planned my talk thoroughly in advance and then had to revise it quickly because of something that another speaker said just before I spoke. Sometimes, speakers have used the same joke or story that I was going to use. Meet your introducer. To ensure a strong introduction, meet and talk with your introducer. Be sure you have prepared a written introduction in large print for him to read. At the top of the page, write the words, "Please read exactly as written." A poor introduction, badly read, can start you off on the wrong foot with any audience. It is amazing how often people who are asked to introduce a speaker make no effort to read and rehearse the introduction before they stand up. They read it in a clumsy and awkward fashion, stumbling and making mistakes. The way that you can guard against disappointing the audience is to be sure that your introduction is so well written that the introducer cannot hurt you if he does a poor job of reading it. Showtime. When you're introduced, take a deep breath and walk boldly and confidently onto the stage. Thank the introducer by either shaking hands or even giving him or her a hug, if it is appropriate. Turn and face the audience members squarely, smiling as if you're really happy to see them. Remain silent for a few seconds, allowing the audience to settle down and center its attention on you. Let your eyes slowly sweep over the audience, dividing it into 4 sections or 4 quarters, with 2 quarters in front and 2 in the rear. Select someone in the center of each quarter to focus on and return regularly to that person. Begin with a statement that immediately captures the audience's attention by addressing a common desire, concern, or problem of the audience. For example, when I speak to a business or sales audience, I will often start off by saying, "I have some good news for you. We're living at the very best time in human history. More people are going to make more money in the years ahead than have been made in the last century. Your job is to be one of those people, and my job is to show you how to get there." With this type of an opening, I immediately capture the audience's interest, attention, and curiosity. People mentally and physically leaned forward, eager to hear how to achieve this goal. Getting your point across. No matter what your speech or presentation is about, there are several things you must do to make sure your audience follows your logic, is engaged, and becomes open to your influence. Link each point back into the story. Anytime you use a story to get a point across, be sure to link it back to your point often. For example, by the time I deliver the introductory statement I just mentioned, everyone is leaning forward, eager to hear the rest of the story. I then might explain how Alexander led his army against Darius at the Battle of Arbela, defeated Darius with superior generalship despite 10-1 odds, and went on to conquer most of the known world at that time. For the rest of my talk, I would explain the leadership qualities of vision, courage, commitment, determination, innovation, and responsibility. By the end of the talk, each executive should see himself or herself as a potential Alexander, contesting great odds to achieve victory in competitive markets. Activate both brains. Nobel Prize-winning research concludes that humans have both a left and a right brain. The left brain is logical, practical, analytical, factual, and unemotional. This is the part of the brain that we use to take in information of all kinds. The right brain, on the other hand, is activated by pictures, emotions, music, and stories. People make decisions with their right brains. Your job is to activate and stimulate the right brains of your audiences as much as possible. The more you address your remarks and comments to the right brain, the more fully engaged the audience will be with you and with what you say. Remember the windshield wiper method. As you develop your talk using facts and stories, select a person in the center of each quarter of the audience and return regularly to that person. Select people who are smiling and positive and who seem to be fully engaged in your message. Focus on these people, one at a time, and speak a complete sentence to them as if they were the only person in the room. Then, sweep your eyes slowly to another person in another quarter of the room and deliver a line directly to him or her. Look directly at people in the audience. When you speak directly to a person, everyone behind that person, fanning out in a V shape, feels like you're speaking directly to him or her. When you speak to a person farther back in the room, the people behind that person feel that they are the center of your attention. The more that people feel you're speaking to and connecting directly with them, the more engaged they will be with you and with what you're saying. Stand and deliver. When speaking to a large audience, practice the stand and deliver method. Pick a 3-foot by 3-foot or 5-foot by 5-foot square and stay within that square. Discipline yourself not to move around over a wide area or rock back and forth. Avoid the tendency to step forward and backward continually. These motions are usually the result of nervousness. You can control them by being aware of them before you stand up to speak. Let your arms fall naturally at your sides. Do not fiddle or fumble with your clothing, and don't put your hands in your pockets. Bring your hands up naturally as you speak to make a point. Then let them fall again naturally to your sides. Making smooth transitions. This is very much like shifting gears. When you have developed a point completely, you need to signal clearly to the audience that you are moving on to a new point. If you don't, audience members will become confused and think that your remarks somehow tie into something that you have just said. Your transitions can be as simple as, the next point that I would like to touch on is, sometimes I will say, now, moving right along, I want to tell you about this. Deal with each point completely. Wrap it up with a mini conclusion, and then move on. Do not return to a point that you have already discussed. This only confuses your audience. Speak extemporaneously. Sometimes, when you're speaking, a perfect example, story, or piece of humor will jump into your mind. Because this is natural and spontaneous, it's a wonderful way to connect with your audience. Signal this extemporaneous point by saying something like, "I just thought of something that illustrates this perfectly." You can also say, "Just last night on television, someone was saying," let the listeners know that you are digressing from the body of your talk. You can say, "Let me digress for a moment." When you have finished the story, like shifting gears, transition back into the body of your talk. Sometimes I say, "Here's a quick sidebar on the subject," or "Here's something that just happened last week." Whatever you say, and however you say it, your audience must feel that you are in complete control and that your talk has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Discipline yourself to stay on track. There are many speakers who are what I call enthusiasts. They're positive, funny, and articulate. They're usually intelligent, experienced, and well-informed. But their talks wander all over the place. They often start well, with an opening story or important point. From then on, they leap from point to point, going backward, forward, and sideways, and blurting out whatever thought, story, or joke pops into their minds along the way. Often, they're funny, likable, and entertaining. Audiences laugh and applaud, but at the end, the audience has no real idea what the speaker was talking about or trying to convey. People leave feeling somehow disappointed, as if they had been invited for dinner and all they got was an appetizer. Maintaining coherence. There is a deep psychological desire for people to sense reason, logic, and order in the universe. This is called a sense of coherence. When you give a talk that moves clearly from point to point, you satisfy this need. As a result, the audience feels relaxed and comfortable with you. As a result, the audience feels relaxed and comfortable with you. They're interested and curious to see where you're going next. In Chapter 2, I mentioned the speech design method of drawing a series of large circles in a row from the top of a page to the bottom and having each circle represent a key point that you're going to touch on. With my sale audiences, I teach what I call the spine and rib method of asking questions and developing a sales presentation. The spine represents the individual vertebra, the key points to make in a conversation. The ribs represent the digressions, stories, quotes, or illustrations to use to bring the major points to life or prove them to your audience. Planning your talk so that you go from point to point like a frog leaping from lily pad to lily pad makes it easier for you to remember and more enjoyable for your audience to hear. Write it out word for word. Writing out key sentences word for word enables you to make sure your point is phrased in such a way that it will have its greatest possible effect on your audience. Look at the difference between saying something like, "You can do anything you want," and expressing the same thought by saying, "What you can do in the future is limited only by your own imagination." Use the power of three. One of the most powerful speech devices is to speak in threes. For some reason, the human mind is unduly affected when you explain or express something using three phrases. For example, in the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln used the famous words, "of the people, by the people, for the people." John F. Kennedy's famous inaugural address contained the words, "pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship." So, in my talks, I often say, you have the ability right now to solve any problem, overcome any obstacle, and achieve any goal that you can set for yourself. The more time and thought you put into the phrases and sentences in your talks, the more powerful and persuasive you will be. Some years ago, a friend was encouraging me to write a book. He made this wonderful statement: "Writing is something that you can get worse at by doing." It is the same with speaking. You can only get better at speaking when you speak. This is why the key to success in speaking is, to paraphrase Albert Hubbard, to speak and speak and speak and speak and speak and speak and speak. Creating audience rapport. The more people like you, the more open they will be to being influenced and persuaded by you. As Willie Loman, in The Death of a Salesman, said, "The most important thing is to be liked." Nothing gets the audience more involved with your message than for you to smile and be warm and genial when you stand before them. The more you appear to be enjoying yourself, the more the audience will enjoy being with you. The more people like you, the more they will open up to you and be receptive to what you want them to do. One of the most powerful ways to build audience involvement is for you to ask questions. Whenever you ask a person a question, he's conditioned to answer. Even if he does not know the answer, or if it is a trick question or rhetorical device, when you ask a question, you grab his attention. He searches his mind for the possible answer. He leans forward to hear from you what the answer might be. For example, when I want to grab the attention of a business audience, I casually ask, "What is the highest paid and most important work in America?" First of all, the audience responds with silence. Then, people begin to call out possible answers. Show business, sales, professional speaking, sports. After they have taken a stab at the answer, I smile and say, "The highest paid and most valuable work in America is thinking." This is because, of all things that people do, thinking has the greatest possible consequences. The better you think, the better decisions you make. The better decisions you make, the better actions you will take. The better actions you take, the better results you will get. And the better will be the quality of your life and work. Everything begins with thinking. I then talk about some of the thinking tools and techniques of the most effective people in business and industry. Throughout my talk, I loop back to the ways that top people in this business think in different situations. This theme running like a thread through my talk keeps people totally engaged. Keeping good timing and pacing. The best definition of a good talk to an audience of any size is enthusiastic conversation. Think of driving a car with a standard transmission, rather than an automatic. You continually shift gears in your talk. You can go faster or slower. You can speak louder or softer. You can change the intensity of your voice from relaxed to almost passionate. When you continually vary the tempo, speed, and volume of your words, pausing and then continuing, faster and then slower, you keep the audience as involved with you as they would be watching an Oscar race. This makes whatever you're saying far more interesting and enjoyable for the listeners. They never get a chance to relax or to become bored. You're always changing some element of the talk. I will talk about this in Chapter 8. When speaking to large audiences, you will almost invariably be asked to give shorter talks. Large audiences are most often gathered for conferences at which there are multiple speakers. Thus, they have tight time frames, and the various talks have to fit into these constraints. For example, a friend of mine was recently booked to speak at an international convention and flown to Hong Kong to give a 12-minute talk on his particular subject. That was the precise amount of time that the convention organizers had allotted for this talk on their schedule. The amount of information you include in your talk is determined by the amount of time you're given. The rule that I follow is that if I'm asked to speak for up to 30 minutes, I build a talk around 3 key points. If I'm asked to speak up for up to 1 hour, I build a talk around 5 key points. If I'm asked to speak for up to 90 minutes, I include 7 key points. These guidelines give you a template with which you can develop any talk. Summarizing and closing. This is often the most important part of your talk, the part that will be remembered the longest. It must be planned and delivered with care. The rule is that you should memorize your opening and closing so that you could wake up and deliver them from a sound sleep. Your closing remarks should be like a very clear period, if not an exclamation mark at the end of a sentence. The simplest way to close a talk is to summarize your key points by repeating them, one by one, and giving the natural conclusion that flows from your remarks. Your final remarks are the call to action that asks or tells your audience what you wanted to do with the information you have just presented. The most important principle is to end your talk with a punch. Sometimes you can use the rule of 3 to conclude your remarks and make your final recommendations. Sometimes you can end with a quote or a poem. If appropriate, you can end with a joke that relates back to your story and emphasizes the main point you are trying to make. In Chapter 11, you will learn how to end with a bang. When you reach the end, stop. When you finish your talk, stop speaking and stand silently, smiling at the audience. When I was a younger speaker, at the end of my talks, I would say, "Thank you," and immediately begin looking around to see how to get off the stage. Sometimes I would start shuffling or stacking up my written materials. I found later that this merely disconcerts or confuses the audience. Instead, I learned the discipline of standing perfectly still and smiling at the end of my talk, signaling that the talk was over and that it was now the audience's responsibility to acknowledge and respond. Wait for it. Again and again, as I stood there silently, first one person would begin to clap, then another and another. Soon, the entire audience would be clapping. If you are an outstanding speaker, one person will stand up while continuing to clap. Then, a person next to him or behind him will stand up. One by one, the audience members will rise to their feet, giving you a standing ovation, but you have to wait for it. Special occasion speaking. There will be times when you may be asked to speak on a special occasion, often with little notice or time for preparation. These can be important moments in your life and the lives of others, and they must be attended to with care and attention. The 5 most common special occasion speeches are: Number 1, awards and congratulations. Number 2, introductions or thanks at a public event. Number 3, birthdays or anniversaries. Number 4, weddings. And number 5, funerals. In each case, you should use all of your speaking skills to give an excellent speech. Number 1, awards and congratulations. Think through your remarks and write them down before you speak. Be clear about the purpose of the award and what the person has done to deserve it. Everyone is watching your performance and taking note of what you say, especially the recipient of the award. The more important your position in the organization, the greater will be the impact of your words, and the longer they will be remembered. Whenever someone is acknowledged and congratulated in front of others, especially his or her peers, the occasion is a major event. By speaking with warmth, intelligence, and knowledge about the recipient's valuable accomplishment, you can have a major effect on the person and on all others who are watching. Number 2, introductions or thanks. You may be asked to introduce the speaker at a public talk or association meeting. Take this responsibility seriously. Everyone is watching. On my occasion, because of the time and attention given to the introduction of the speaker, the introduction itself is actually better than the speech. Many aspiring executives have put themselves on the fast track by giving an outstanding introduction to a senior executive or important industry speaker. Some years ago, I was invited to introduce Barbara Bush, wife of former President George H.W. Bush, to a large audience. I prepared thoroughly and gave such a strong introduction that she got a standing ovation as she walked onto the stage. The president, who was watching, personally thanked me afterward. I never forgot it. You may be asked to thank a speaker after a talk. In this case, keep notes of the key points covered by the speaker. When you go up to thank him or her, briefly recap what you felt were the most important points of the speech. Thank you for that wonderful talk. We all enjoyed your remarks. What I most liked about what you said was, when you speak well on your feet in front of an audience, people automatically think that you're smarter, more articulate, and more competent than others. Don't blow it. Number 3, birthdays or anniversaries. These are major events in the lives of most people. When you're asked to speak or to give a toast, do your homework. Speak to the person in advance and ask her a little about her life. Ask others about her to discover little-known facts you can weave into your remarks. When you speak, always be uplifting and congratulatory. Avoid jokes at the expense of the people you're talking about. Make them feel good about themselves. By so doing, you make everyone in attendance feel good about themselves as well. Number 4. Weddings. This is one of the most important occasions in a person's life and in the lives of the parents of the bride and groom. The things you say and the words you use will be remembered for years. Plan them with care. Some years ago, I was invited to the wedding of the children of some very nice people. They were blue-collar workers with a limited budget. They asked their 23-year-old son, a mechanic, to propose the toast for his 25-year-old sister, who was getting married. The wedding was a lot of fun, and everyone was drinking, laughing, and making jokes about the newlyweds about being married, sometimes a bit off color. But when the brother got up to speak, it was immediately obvious that he took his job seriously. As he began to speak about his sister, everyone settled down. For 15 minutes, he spoke about their lives together, growing up, and about what a wonderful woman she was. He went back over the years and told little stories about their childhoods, their parents, and their experiences as brother and sister. By the time he raised his glass and proposed a toast to a lifetime of love and happiness, there was not a dry eye in the room. When you're asked to speak at a wedding, think about your words being timeless. Speak only about love, commitment, and lifelong happiness. Be glad for the bride and groom, and wish them all the best in their lives together. Your words mean a lot. Number 5. Funerals. You may be asked to give a eulogy at the funeral of a friend or family member. When you do, you must write out every word in advance for 2 reasons. First, you will probably become quite emotional as you read it. If it is not written, you will lose your place and your composure. Second, if you have written it carefully, people will want copies of it to keep forever. When you read the eulogy, go slowly and recite each word. It should not be more than 5 to 8 minutes long. In writing a eulogy, begin by talking about how the deceased was a good, loving, honest, caring person. Go on to talk about his or her family members and how important they were to him or her. Talk about some of the person's history and accomplishments. End with a statement of sorrow and regret, and that we shall never forget his or her inspiration or contribution to our lives. Offering the eulogy for someone is one of the most important talks you can ever give. Plan and prepare it with care. Summary. Speaking in front of large audiences is one of the most challenging and exciting things that you will ever do. Thousands of speakers give talks to large audiences every day, all over the world. It is a learnable skill. Remember that how you deliver a speech is as important as the speech itself. When you learn to give excellent public talks as a result of preparation and practice, you will become one of the most persuasive and influential people in your field.